Okay, good evening, everybody. Erev Tisha B'Av. Erev Tisha B'Av. Ches Av. B'ezrat Hashem, Mashiach will come tomorrow, and we won't be sitting and fasting. You know, it's a person says that, but how much do you believe it? How much do you really believe that Mashiach can come tomorrow? It's an intellectual idea at best. Making intellectual ideas part of our conscious world is what the Mesilas Yesharim talks about when he says when he says that a person has to incorporate at the beginning. I forget the exact lashon now. He has to incorporate what he knows intellectually into making it part of his reality. A person doesn't live in ideas. A person lives in what I would call an emotional reality. A person can come and sit here and listen to Rabbi Gottlieb and hear all of the demonstrations and the verifications of how, with the limit of human intelligence, we can understand that the Torah is true, but that won't make him into a maimin. It won't make him into a believer. Emunah, belief, is a midah, is a character trait. And like all character traits, it can be weakened and it can be strengthened. You understand English? Okay. So, for example, a person can be a ka'asan, he can be an angry person. And he can intellectually understand that to be an angry person is a very, very bad thing. Intellectually he can understand that, but that's not going to stop him being a ka'asan unless he works. B'yadata hayom, he has to work. The person has to work on incorporating, actualizing, making real the ideas that he believes in, living inspired. We say it every day, 3 times a day in Aleinu. You should know Shevosam Elvavecha. You should know today, and you should return it to your heart. Ki Hashem, the God, is one. Ein od. Real emunah is a midah. It's something you have to work on. It can be strengthened and it can be weakened. So we're believing Jews intellectually. Ani ma'amin be'emunah shalema b'vias HaMashiach. I believe the Mashiach will come. A person at this time of year should introspect, should take time and think, what's it going to be like when Mashiach comes? What's it going to be like for me? How will my life be different? How will the world be different? There won't be demonstrations. There won't be animosity, hatred. Beis HaMikdash Sheni was destroyed because of sinas chinam, baseless hatred. Sinas chinam, lashon hara, slander, all of the low reactions, knee-jerk reactions that a person has in his relations to other people, unless he makes himself into a mensch, into a human being, elevates himself, doesn't allow his base instincts of competitiveness, greed, lust, all of the low things in the person will take him over unless he works. And this Tisha B'Av is the time of the year. Chazal teaches that every year that the Beis HaMikdash is not rebuilt, it's as though we burned it down ourselves, biyadayim, actively. Which means that we, each one of us at this time of the year, should be thinking a little bit, at least, about our own lives and our own relationships, about Ahavas Yisrael, what it means to love the Jewish people. What does it really mean to be a good person? What are my responsibilities as a human being, as a Jew? Analyzing before you go to bed at night. Close your eyes and think for a second. Rerun the day. Think about it. Ahavas Yisrael. Sinas Chinam, baseless hatred, destroyed the second Beis HaMikdash. And something called Ahavas Chinam, it said, will bring it back. Now, Ahavas Chinam, interesting enough, if you translate that phrase directly into English, it comes out as free love. That's not what we're talking about. I grew up in a generation which all honestly believed that all you need is love. That's a falsity. Like all big lies, it has a kernel of truth. Because Hashem created this world out of love. Love, quite literally, makes the world go round. But it's not the love that was thought about and praised and exaggerated and indulged in the 60s and the 70s. That was merely a kind of selfishness. Famous story about the Rav Elia Lapion, the Rosh Yeshiva of Kfar Hasidim, walked into the dining room one day and he saw this bocha tucking into this large piece of fish. And he walked over to him and he said, "Like fish, don't you?" He said, "Oh, I love fish. I love fish." He says, "No, you don't. If you really love fish, you'd be happier if it was still swimming around in the sea. You love yourself." Most of what a person calls love is really a love of himself, and the object of his love, be that food or a wife, God forbid, is the way that a person can satiate his love of himself. All Lashon Hara comes from a kind of view of the world where I'm the center of everything. I am the center of the world. And you know something, you're breathing my air, you're married to my wife, you're wearing my shirts. And that's the basis of Sinas Chinam, the belief that really everything is mine, and if you weren't here, I would have it. Rav Yoel Teitelbaum, Satmar Rebbe, Zecher Livrocha, was well known as a kanoi, as a zealot protecting Jewish values in the secular world and in the Jewish world in general. What's less known about him is that he also had a heart of gold. He was what they would call an easy touch. He was very, very generous, extremely generous, to a fault. Apparently one day this well-known confidence trickster called the Uncle weaseled his way into the Rebbe's study and managed to gain an audience with him. And the Uncle, this confidence trickster, this con man, poured out this sob story, this terrible story about how his wife was in a mental institution and his daughter was 30 years old and she couldn't find a shidduch, and his son had just been evicted from his flat, and Yoel sat there and he looked at him and his eyes filled with tears, and he took all the, went around, opened all the drawers, took all the money that he had, and he said, "Please, take the money, get a shidduch for your daughter, and a flat for your son, a apartment for your son, and pay your wife's hospital bills. Here, take the money." And as he was going out, Yankel, this conman, was going out, the Rebbetzin came in, and she sees Yankel going out, and she says, "What was he doing here?" He says, "My dear wife, you have no idea of the tzoros that this poor fellow has. His wife has been in mental institutions. He can't find a sugar for his daughter. His son's been evicted from his flat." He says, "Son? Daughter? This guy's not even married. None of what he said is true. It's a complete lie. None of it is true." And Rabbi Yoel went, "None of it's true? Oh, Baruch Hashem." That's Ahavas Yisrael. And we laugh because, that's something like so far away from what I'm talking about myself, my reaction would be. It's easy to love and respect somebody when they're just like you. But can you really love someone when they're completely different to you, when they believe in things which are completely the opposite of what you believe, politically? Can you respect them when they take pride in doing things that the Torah says are disgusting and disgust you? Do you look at them through the eyes of love? Even when they're completely wrong, can you cherish the neshama inside, even when the outside is very difficult to cherish? Every Jew, every person is priceless, is a creation. When you smile at somebody, you say you matter. I smile, I say, I see the pure neshama inside you. I love you for free. That's real Ahavas Chinam. There's a story about the Chofetz Chaim that one day in Radin, he saw a Jew being Machal Shabbos B'Fahesia, desecrating Shabbos publicly, and he fainted. He fainted. And they brought him round, and he said, "What's wrong with my Shabbos that I saw such a thing? What's wrong with my Shabbos?" When we see divisions in Klal Yisrael, as are going on in this country, the like of which have never been known before, we have to think to ourselves, what's wrong with my Bein Adam Lechaveiro? What's wrong with my Limud Torah? That I see such things and these things are happening. The Nefesh HaChaim already said, there are two kinds of kiruv. He didn't say this, but essentially there are two kinds of kiruv. There's a kiruv where a person goes out and he learns with people, but there's another kiruv. And the Nefesh HaChaim explains as follows. What I do has an echo. Our actions have echoes. Our actions ascend to the highest levels in heaven and they come down as a hashpah, as an influence into this world. What happens in this world, all over the world, is the direct result of the way the Jewish people perform in terms of mitzvahs, in terms of chesed, in terms of limud Torah. A typhoon is ordered up in the China Sea. Somebody sits down in the Beis Medrash in Or Sameach and learns a Tosfos and breaks his head on it. The typhoon dissipates. This is the way Hashem he goes into great detail about the chain that goes up and up and up of the neshama and the power of the neshama, the power of a Jew. Similarly, he says that a big Talmid Chacham one day doesn't learn with all his might. So somebody who normally learns Gemara, he learns Chumash, and somebody learns Chumash, opens up a Jewish newspaper, and somebody who opens up a Jewish newspaper opens a non-Jewish newspaper, etc., all the way down the line until in Paris a Jewish boy marries a non-Jewish girl. There's no responsibility. There's no privilege without responsibility. We have the privilege of being the Jewish people, and that is also an awesome responsibility. And if we see the divisions and the hatred that's going on in the Jewish world at the moment, we have to understand that's a taina on us. I'm sorry to say, but that's the case. We are not performing, and we are looking at sitting on a Tisha B'Av tomorrow night. It shouldn't happen to us. Mashiach should come, but if he doesn't come, we'll all know why that is. And it doesn't have to be like that. And I saw, somebody told me, I think my son, a statistic that basically in this country, most of the country is to some extent religious. Most of the country fasts on Yom Kippur. Rav Mordechai Perlman, should be well, said in 1967, he was in here in 1967 after the Six-Day War, you couldn't get a pair of tefillin here in Eretz Yisrael. You couldn't buy a pair of tefillin, they had to send them from America. Such was the feeling of the closeness to Hashem and having been rescued. I myself remember I was here in the Gulf War against Saddam Hussein. And I remember we sat in our sealed rooms with the plastic on the walls, on the windows, and the smatutim, the rags soaked in chlorine bleach that we put against the doors to make sure that, God forbid, if there was poison gas, it would neutralize the gas. I remember this well. And I remember that war came to an end on Shushan Purim. Can you imagine what it was like? On Shushan Purim, the story of the great rescue of the Jewish people from physical annihilation. And nobody knew he wasn't going to send poison gas. Nobody knew that at the time. And we went into our sealed rooms, and I remember tearing the plastic off that window with a feeling of cherus, of freedom, of deliverance, and opening the window and breathing in the air as though I'd been in captivity for 25 years. The feeling was unbelievable. And you would get into taxi drivers with secular taxi drivers, and they'd start quoting you, psukim from the Novi, about how it says in Yeshaya, I think it's Yeshaya, that you go into a sealed room. We're a holy people. Scratch a Jew and you'll find a Ma'amin. We're Ma'aminim b'nei Ma'aminim. And if there's such dissonance and such antagonism, we are the people who should be fixing it. Okay, so how do we do this? I'd like to read you a letter that was sent to the Chavetz Chaim Heritage Foundation. Dear Chavetz Chaim Heritage Foundation, as we embark on the Bein HaMatzarim, culminating in Tisha B'Av, I have some ideas that might be shared with Klal Yisrael to help us do even better this year in the area of Ben Adam L'Chaveiro, and in Mitzvah Hashem bring Mashiach Tzidkenu. As a therapist, I sit with struggling people every day. There is so much pain in Klal Yisrael, and while we have no control over the nisyonos that Hashem gives each person, we do have the ability to control our behavior, our speech, and our ability to add or alleviate the pain that people have. It's time to stop judging other people as to why they were given their nisyonos, their trials. No, you don't know why your friend's child went off the derech, why he stopped being religious. You do not know why someone is still single or they got divorced. And you certainly don't know why a couple is childless or why one of them ill. Stop the comments. Stop the unwanted advice. Stop the judgments. Daven for those who struggle and watch your words. Hatznei aleches, walking with tznius with Hashem, walking humbly modestly with Hashem, is so much more than necklines and head coverings. Klal Yisrael is known as Rachmanim and Baishanim, merciful people, easily shy, embarrassed. Stop posting your nachas. Stop posting pictures of your beautiful children, of your grandchildren, of your simchas, of your picture-perfect family. Change your WhatsApp profile photo. Stop posting nachas pictures and videos on status and social media. So many people dream of having what you have and don't have. Why cause them pain by showing them what you have and they don't? And you can't even ask mechila, forgiveness of those people who you've hurt, because you don't even know to whom that picture or that video has caused pain. Keep your nachas pictures for your family chats and be humble in what Hashem has given you. If there's any way to incorporate these messages in the messages disseminated on Tisha B'Av, it would be such a service. Too many people are in pain. Let's do our part, not to add to it. Sincerely, Anonymous. My wife told me about a friend of hers who went to a wedding where she didn't know anybody. So she sat down at the table, and nobody at the table said anything, didn't say a word to her. So she felt embarrassed. So what did she do? She took out her cell phone and pretended she was speaking to somebody. Now, they're just so long that you can pretend to be speaking to somebody on the phone. So, and they're not there. So after a few minutes, she felt so bad, she just left. Often we go to weddings or simchas or any event and we see somebody sitting by themselves. How are you? What's your name? It's incredible. Each one of us knows how sensitive people are, because we all are very sensitive. You know how sensitive people are, because you know how sensitive you are yourself. If you really think other people are less sensitive than you are, why would that be? Think about what hurts you, and think about how you can prevent other people from feeling that feeling. You know, you have to be very careful. Sensitivity. A Jew really only has... Let me tell you a story about someone called Shabsi Frankel. Shabsi Frankel, well known for the Frankel Rambam. He was well known for digging up ancient Jewish scripts and republishing them. And he found in the, I think it was in the Cairo Geniza. A Geniza is like a storage of, you know, Baruch Hashem, we have so many texts from Rishonim and even before because of Genizot. A Geniza basically means a place where you put a Jewish holy book when it's become unusable. So there are many places in the world. The Cairo Geniza in Cairo, because of the very large Jewish community there, is one of the largest in the world. And there are many, many. So he came across in the Cairo Geniza this, I'm not sure it was a handwritten or a first edition of the Rambam's Yad Chazaka. And he was absolutely beside himself with joy. It's something he wanted, because obviously, you know, every text we have we can compare, make emendations to get the most accurate text possible. And he was just so delighted. He went to the authorities. They weren't interested in letting it go for any price. He wasn't a person to take no for an answer, so he went back to the States. He went to the States. He galvanized support in the Congress. He went to England. He spoke to MPs. He really put together this enormous campaign of pressure on the Egyptian government. And eventually the Egyptian government were prepared to let this manuscript go for some astronomical amount of money. I don't even know how much it was, but just like a king's ransom. So the money was paid, and they brought back the manuscript back here to Jerusalem. He had a machon, an institute, where they would edit these manuscripts and publish them. So they put the manuscript down on the table. You can imagine in the conference room, they spread it out. This was like an amazing moment. This was the first time in maybe nearly 1,000 years that this holy work had been gazed at by Jewish eyes. And they opened it up, and it was, of course, it was very, very fragile, but carefully they opened it up, and all of the workers there, all the translators and all the stenographers, and gathered round, and there was this one young fellow, a junior translator, and he was very, very keen, and he was dying to see the Rambam, and he leant forward, and in front of him, he hadn't noticed there was this large styrofoam cup of very sweet, very hot coffee, and his elbow sort of came up, and it was just about to miss, but it just touched the very edge. You can imagine this almost in slow motion, and the coffee spilled all over the manuscript, and within about 2 seconds, it was a complete, illegible glob. So the whole room went. Shabsi Frankel walked over to this guy. He put his arm around him. He said, "Don't worry. We'll get you another cup of coffee." Up to the moment that manuscript was destroyed, his entire job was to bring that manuscript to the eyes of the Jewish people, to edit it, to publish it, to spread Jewish knowledge. As soon as it was destroyed, his job was to make sure that a Jew didn't feel bad. This is what it means to be sensitive. Sensitivity to understand the situation. What does HaKadosh Baruch Hu want from me right now? And it can change like that, on a split second. And a person who's really thinking about serving Hashem will serve Hashem whatever the job is, and the job can change very quickly. I'll never forget words of encouragement. When I was a Talmid here, about 500 years ago, feels like. I was in the Shir of Rav Doiv Schwarzman, Zecher Tzaddik Livracha. Rav Doiv was a genius, unparalleled genius. Rav Moshe Shapiro Zecher Tzaddik Livracha said at his levaya, at his funeral, there was nobody like Rav Doiv, and there never will be anybody like Rav Doiv. It's a pretty amazing thing to say. Rab Aaron Kotler, Zecher Tzaddik Livracha, chose him out of all the Bochrim Eretz Yisrael to be his son-in-law. He was an unbelievable. And I was, Baruch Hashem, I was zoichet to be close to him. My family was close to him. I first arrived here at the age of 37. I hadn't opened the Talmud since I was 37. And 37, first thing you do with the 37-year-old bocher is to get him married. So he took me under his wing, and whatever. Eventually, Baruch Hashem, I met my wife, and he was very much like our tati. He was like the family, the father of the family. And I went in, but I never learned under him. And I was at the time I was in my Rebbe, Naftali Kaplan, Bodl Ben Chaim Tovim. I was in his shir, and Rav Naftali's shir was so slow. He's well known as a mashgiach, but what's less known about him is he was a brilliant mechanech in terms of teaching somebody how to learn Gemara. And I learned many, many things from him. But the speed we used to go at was, we were going so slowly in the Gemara, we were actually sworn to secrecy. We weren't allowed to tell people how slow we were going. We would do everything. He would make sure everybody in the class knew everything. And so I went into Rab Dov's shir. Now Rab Dov was the top shir in Or Samech, and Rab Dov's shir was like unbelievable. He was like, I counted the words before I got lost. It was about 15 words into the shir, and I had no idea what he was talking about. So it was a high-level shir, and he was a genius. And he came over to me. I'd been in the shir for about a week, and he said, "Who is your chavrusa?" So I said, "I don't have a chavrusa." He said, "You don't have a chavrusa? I will be your chavrusa." And he used to take me this Odom Godel Ma'od, this extremely great Talmud Chacham. He used to take me after the shir and sit me down and go through in English one of the points, until I got it. And that to me was so sensitive and showed me what it meant to be a Rebbe. You don't just say, you don't have a chavrusa, work it out. His greatness was not just in Torah. His greatness was that he was a great human being. Our words have echoes. There's a story about a young man who went to a big Talmud Chacham shortly before he got married, because he said he couldn't get married because he had something that had been weighing on his mind. And even though Chazal teaches that the day a person gets married, they're forgiven for all their sins, he felt there was something that had happened in his life that even the day of his marriage would not atone for. So he said to this Odom Godel, this great man, this great Talmud Chacham, he said, "I grew up in Yerushalayim at a time when food was a luxury. Nobody even knew what a banana looked like, except in a picture. So one day the Rebbe went out of the classroom for a few moments, and he left a few coins on his stender. I was hungry," said this fellow, "and I took the money and I put it in my pocket. The Rebbe came back and he saw immediately the money wasn't there. So he made the whole class stand in a line facing the wall, and one by one he checked our pockets. So quickly, before he got to me, I dropped the money into the pocket of the boy who was standing next to me. And when it came to his turn, he couldn't believe that the money was there, and he started to cry. He pleaded with the Rebbe and told him that he hadn't stolen the money, but of course nobody believed him. So after that he got a name of being a ganef, of being a thief. And after that, not long after, he dropped out of the cheder, and bit by bit he went down until he completely left his Yiddishkeit and he became a Chiloni. And so this fellow said, "I can't get married with this on my conscience. How can I ever do tshuva for what I did to that boy? I ruined his life." So his Talmud Chacham said to him, he said, "It reminds me of something that actually happened to me when I was in cheder. The Rebbe also made us stand in a line facing the wall, but when he found the culprit, he didn't let on, but he simply took the money He put the money back in his pocket, and when he got to the end of the line, he said, Tov, let us all say together, Hashivenu Hashem elecha v'noshuva, Chadesh yomeinu kekedem, we'll return to you, Hashem, and you'll return to us, renew our days as of old. Bring us back to you, Hashem, and we will return. As it happens, that little boy who took the money went on to be one of the great Talmidei Chachamim of this generation. Same situation, two reactions. Said the Talmidei Chacham to this fellow who was about to get married, he said, you were not to blame for the other boy dropping out. You were young, you were hungry, and this fellow who dropped out, Hashem will understand what he went through, and he will be judged favorably. Of that I'm sure. So the person I'm most concerned about is the Rebbe. A moment's lack of judgment and sensitivity, it ruins somebody's life. It's frightening. A moment's lack of sensitivity can ruin somebody's life, and a moment's sensitivity can save his life. A couple of years ago, on a Shabbos afternoon, I went to speak to a group of young boys and girls who were just about to go into the IDF, into the army, secular kids. So to prepare them better for their leadership roles, they go to this thing which are called Mechinot Kedam Tzva'ai, which are basically sort of camps which prepare them for the army. The idea is that as they are going to be the elite, their preparation involves meeting different sections of Israeli society that they wouldn't normally meet. So this particular Shabbat, they were being hosted by Haredi families in our area. They were very nice kids, intelligent, articulate, and for the most part they never had any in-depth encounter with someone who was Haredi. I emphasized to them that as a Jew, I have an obligation to love and respect every Jew as my brother, and that Haredim care and love their secular neighbors, even though this may not immediately be apparent. The gulf between the two worlds, which unfortunately seems to have got much bigger, was difficult to bridge that afternoon, but I felt that I made some headway. Towards the end of the presentation, one of the girls accused me of not being a typical Haredi. I said, I'm not sure what a typical Haredi is, but you know, I am a Haredi. I'm sorry, you have to put me into your calculation as well. I may not be your stereotype. She said, no, you're not Haredi. You don't seem judgmental to me. She said, at my lunch, my hostess made me feel like and then she said in Hebrew, kakara reka, an empty wagon. Now it's very interesting, an empty wagon, because I'm not sure she realized it, but this was precisely the argument that the Chazon Ish made to the then Prime Minister of Israel. What happened was David Ben Gurion went to Bnei Brak to speak to the Chazon Ish to try and reach a compromise about yeshiva students and army service. Nothing really changes very much. And Ben Gurion asked the Chazon Ish how the two communities could find a way to live together. And the Chazon Ish responded by quoting from the Gemara in Sanhedrin, which says, if two wagons meet each other while on the ascent to Beit Choron, how should they act? Who gets precedence? If one is laden and the other is unladen, the latter, the unladen wagon, must give way to the former. The kakara reka, the empty wagon, has to give way. The Chazon Ish said that the Haredi community is like a wagon laden with the tradition, the customs of centuries, while the secular community is a young community. It's unladen. Sometimes in our sincere desire to bring our Jewish brothers and sisters close to Yiddishkeit, we can come off as condescending. You poor, benighted creature, how lucky you are to have found yourself at a Haredi Shabbat table where we will disabuse you of all your apikosut and your ignorance. It's very easy when a person feels that he has the truth to treat other people as being ignoramuses. If you treat somebody when you're trying to bring them closer to Yiddishkeit, if you treat that person as an esrog, you'll end up with a lemon. Our actions have echoes. I'm not sure I managed to reverse this young girl's impression of Haredim, but if that hostess had realized that she was really doing the opposite of what she wanted to do, I think she would have felt very bad. Our actions have echoes. My son once told me of a beautiful story that the first day, when the kids get on the bus to go to Cheder for the first day, it's like all the big boys, and they're kind of really shy, and they cry. A lot of them cry. He told me that there was this big boy on the bus the first day he went to Cheder, came over to him and gave him a sweet. So he said that every El after that, when all the young ones start the Cheder, he always makes sure that he has a pocket full of sweets to give to the young kids who might cry. How do we look at people who we completely disagree with, who seem to be doing total evil in our eyes, and how do we don them the kafschus? There's a story about Reb Chaim of Volozhin, who once raised a lot of money to rescue a Jew who'd been captive. Back in those days, there was a favorite thing the non-Jews used to do was to find a Jew, take him ransom, and ransom him off for a lot of money. And there's a mitzvah of pidyon shvuim, ransoming captives, and he raised a lot of money. And the only way to get to this town was to go through this forest. And this forest was notorious to have a lot of murderous bandits in it. They went into the forest, there was no way around, they had to go that way. And almost immediately as they got into this forest, the bandits overtook them, took them captive, tied them up, took the money, and then said, "We're going to kill you all." So Reb Chaim said, "Can I ask please for a last request?" The head bandit said, "What do you want?" He said, "I want a few minutes by myself, please." So he said, "Okay." So Reb Chaim sat down and he put his head in his hands. He looked like he was davening or something, but he was there for a long time, 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes. The bandit started to get a bit restless. Finally, Reb Chaim stood up and he said, "Okay, I'm ready." And this bandit picked up this axe and he looked into his eyes, into Reb Chaim's eyes. He dropped the axe and he said, "We're all getting out of here." Threw the money on the ground and all the bandits ran away. And the Talmidim who'd gone with Reb Chaim said, "A nace, a miracle, a mofes, a wonder." So Reb Chaim said, "That wasn't a nace, that wasn't a miracle." When he told me he was going to kill me, I remembered that the closest devekus, the greatest contact that a person has with the shorish of his neshama, the root of his soul, his greatest contact with Hashem while he's still in this body are the moments before he leaves this world. Just before you leave the world, this is where the neshama has its greatest contact. I didn't want my last moments in this world to be filled with hakpada, with resentment. I didn't want to leave this world with the feeling of hatred and resentment for this bandit who was killing me, taking my life away. So I sat down and I tried to be don lekavschus, to try and figure out some way of removing the feelings of resentment that I had. And it was very difficult, I couldn't do it. And then suddenly I thought to myself, this bandit once upon a time was probably a little boy, an innocent little boy. And he was probably very hungry. And you know something? He stole an apple. And somebody caught him. And they took him and they put him in prison with a bunch of hardened criminals. And he came out of that prison and he joined the criminals. And one day he was stealing something and somebody stood up to him and he turned around and he killed him. Now he had blood in his hands. And then it went on and on and on and on. But basically, at the end of the day, this was an innocent little boy who'd taken the wrong path in life. And maybe not even through his own fault, through hunger, through desperation. When I felt that, I felt at that point, then I could now leave the world. I'd rid myself of my resentment, and that's why, and I told to him that I was ready, and he looked into my eyes, and he saw that I knew who he really was. And in that moment I changed him. There's an expression we say in Hebrew, don lekav schus, which means to judge somebody favorably, which in English probably comes out as giving somebody the benefit of the doubt. But don lekav schus in Hebrew actually means to judge somebody for the good. You can change somebody who you can change who a person is by looking at them positively. You can change who they are. He changed that bandit. This is a tremendous lesson when you become Mitzvah Shem parents. That, let me finish the story. That if you have a child who's finding it very difficult at school, if you come down on him, if you confirm all the worst things he feels about himself, you will have confirmed his negative image of himself. But if you see his potential, if you see the goodness, and in every Jew there's a wonderful neshama gleaming in there somewhere. In every chiloni, there's a beautiful neshama gleaming in there somewhere. If you can take it upon yourself to look and see that person, you can change that person. You can change a bandit into a tzaddik. We have that power to change other people. It's not just looking at them favorably. Our gaze, our attitude, the way we look at somebody can change who they are. Yeah.
So it's almost like you judge someone towards the good?
You make him into a good person. You judge him. You put him into that category. It's not just you take his actions and you kind of, which is what it usually means. You take somebody's actions and you find an excuse. You find a way of, which is what Reb Chaim did in the beginning. But actually, once he'd done that, he changed who that person was. He made him see that bandit as he really was. This is, I think, the avoda of Tisha B'Av, is to try and don lekav schus. Another story about, this is a story about Aaron Leib Steinman's Zatzal. There was a young fellow from a religious family in Bnei Brak who one day decided to turn his back on religion. He didn't want to know anything about it. He came from a very frum family in Bnei Brak. You've all been to Bnei Brak, so it's a very religious place. He moved out of his home, and he moved not too far away to his uncle's apartment in Tel Aviv, which was, geographically like about 50-minute drive, but culturally the North Pole. So time went on. This fellow was living in his secular uncle's flat in Tel Aviv, and he met a non-Jewish girl, somebody who'd come to work on a kibbutz from Sweden or somewhere, and they fell in love, and they got engaged. Now this was too much even for his secular uncle. I mean, even the secular uncle understood that's... So the uncle got very annoyed with him, and he couldn't get his nephew to cancel the wedding, so he said to the nephew, well, at least you've got to go home and tell your parents. You have to go and face your parents. So the young fellow agreed to go back, and he insisted it wasn't going to interfere with his work, so he was going to go back on Shabbos, and his parents had to agree to his conditions. So what were his conditions? His conditions were basically he spent most of Shabbos night on his parents' porch with all the neighbors over there, with a cigarette in his mouth and his iPhone in the other hand, surfing the web. And Shabbos morning he was out there bright and early again with his cigarette and his iPhone. In the afternoon, his father came over to him and asked him if he wanted to go to hear a shiur by Rav Aaron Leib Steinman. Surprisingly, the son agreed to go. And after the shiur, the father brought him over to Rav Aaron Leib to wish him a good Shabbos. His father told the Rav that his son was no longer Shomer Shabbos. Rav Aaron looked at this fellow and asked him, how long is it since you kept Shabbos? So he said, 2 years. And Rav Aaron said, and during that time, did you ever have thoughts of tshuva? So this fellow said, yeah, I guess about 4 times. Rav Aaron said, now how long, when you had those thoughts of tshuva, how long did those thoughts last? He said, I don't know, about 10 minutes. So Rav Aaron said to him, so it comes out that in the last 2 years, you had 40 minutes of b'mokum balei tshuva ein tzadikim gemurim omdim sham. You had 40 minutes of, in the place of a Baal Tshuva, not even a complete tzaddik can stand in that place. For that, Reb Aaron said, I envy you. It's Shabbos. This young fellow went back to his uncle's apartment in Tel Aviv, but somehow what the Rav had said to him wouldn't leave him alone. He became very uncomfortable. He decided he was going to cancel the wedding. One thing led to another until he became, again, got back to Yiddishkeit. And today, apparently, he's learning in a kollel. Now, if you think about it, something I just told you about this story doesn't make any sense. Why would he want to go and hear a shiur from Reb Steinman? Why did he agree to go to the shiur on Shalashudas on Shabbos afternoon? There he was sitting on his parents' porch, puffing cigarettes and playing with his iPhone. Somebody asked him this question, and he said, when I was in Kita Dalet in Cheder, my class went to be tested, have a feher with Reb Aaron Leib Zatzal. So the Rebbe, my Rebbe, had asked Reb Aaron Leib that he should give us very easy questions. So Reb Aaron Leib asked questions that everyone could answer. So when each boy answered his question, Reb Aaron Leib gave him a candy. So when it was my turn to go in, he asked me an easy question, but I didn't know the answer. So he asked me an even easier question. I still didn't know the answer. So he asked me even an easier question, and I still couldn't answer. While everybody else was leaving with their candy in their hand, Reb Aaron called me over and he said to him, in Torah, in Yiddishkeit, you get reward for effort, not for results. All the children tried to answer one question, and so they got one candy. You tried to answer 3 questions, so you get 3 candies. And with a smile, he dropped 3 candies into my hand. Many years ago, my daughter, I was nearly 30, she's 30 now, came home from school and told us that a teacher had taught us a medrash, that just before Mashiach comes, Hashem will stretch a rope from one end of the world to the other, and everyone will have to grab onto it and hold onto it very tight, because he's going to shake it very hard, and only those with strong emunah, only those people who've worked on their emunah, will be able to hang on. She said to me, Daddy, we've got to find that rope. Where is the rope? Is it going to go through our Ze'ebira? Will we be able to hang on? I said to her, right now, Dad, the rope is going to go through Azebira, it's going to go through London, it's going to go through Tel Aviv. Right now, Hashem is shaking the rope very hard. And we're going to have to hang on very, very hard. I want to finish with a story that I heard from Rav Mendel Weinbach, Seikat Tzadel Livracha. Story about the Bluzhever Rebbe. How important it is for us to hang on. Even when the world seems to be trumpeting a series of values which are inimical to us, even when the secular world seems to be so attractive, where the whole world is saying, why are you Jews sitting there unwashed with your beards and your unkempt hair and your itchy beards? We're going down to the sea. We're going to chill. We're going to have our pina coladas by the pool. What are you guys doing there in the dark on the floor? The story is about the Bluzhever Rebbe. The Bluzhever Rebbe Zatzal was a lion of faith, of emunah. He lost his wife and 11 children in the war. And he managed to emerge from the war and rebuild his family, rebuilt a community, the Bluzhever Rebbe. The story goes like this, that the Nazis were building this road called the Janowska Road, and they were using slave labor, Jewish slave labor. And one night the Allies came over and they bombed this road. They bombed it to smithereens. The Nazis were furious. So they wanted to take it out on the Jews. So they herded all the Jews out of their huts into this freezing Polish winter, and they made them all line up at the mouth of the largest of the bomb craters. And they said, Jews, we're going to have a little entertainment tonight. Each one of you is going to jump across this crater. Those of you who make it to the other side can go back to your bunks. Those of you who fall into the crater will be machine gunned to death. Let's start. So in that line was the Bluzhever Rebbe, and there was another fellow who the Bluzhever Rebbe had made friends with, who completely lost his faith in the war. During the war, he just lost his faith in God completely. But they became friends, and he said to the Bluzhever Rebbe, he said, I'm not going to perform for these pigs. I'm not going to perform like a circus animal. When it comes my turn, I'm going to stand there. I'm not jumping. Let them shoot me where I am. The Bluzhever Rebbe said to him, my son, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us the most precious of gifts, the gift of life itself. But he's given it to us with one condition, that we are not allowed to give it back to him 1 second earlier than he takes it from us. It happened that when the Bluzhever Rebbe had finished speaking, it was his turn to jump. I remember he was old, they were all starving, it was freezing. The Bluzhever Rebbe backed up and he made this tremendous leap off the side of the crater, and by a miracle he landed on the other side. 2 seconds later, this young fellow from Vilna, his friend, landed next to him. And they looked at each other for a long time. And this young fellow said to the Bluzhever Rebbe, how did you do that? How did you do that? You're old, you're emaciated. How did you do that? Bluzhever Rebbe said to him, when I leapt off the side of the crater, I suddenly saw my Zayda, my grandfather, and his Zayda, and his Zayda, and all of the holy Jews, all the way back to Mount Sinai. And I reached out and I grabbed onto my Zayda's coattails and he pulled me across. So that's how I got across. He said to this young fellow, but how did you get across? He said, Rebbe, I was hanging onto your coattails. All of us are hanging on to somebody else's coattails, and gentlemen, somebody is hanging on to our coattails. We are a chain of belief, of emunah, which stretches across the generations. Very soon, it should be this year, if we really try and fix up in our relationships with the people we're closest to, take a good think. Think about how I can improve that. How can I be kinder? How can I be more sensitive? How can I just think a second before opening my mouth? How can I play down my own ego and realize that all I'm here is to do the will of Hashem, and whatever that may be. And B'ezrat Hashem, this time, next year, we'll all be celebrating the great joy of the 9th of Av with the rebuilding the Beis HaMikdash. B'ezrat Hashem.